The businessman in seat 3 slams his briefcase shut and shakes his head angrily at the flight attendant. "I'm not flying anywhere with some woman pilot who probably got her job through affirmative action." 81-year-old Captain Helen Hawk Rodriguez adjusts her uniform cap as she walks through the cabin for her pre-flight check, listening to passengers demand a real pilot, completely unaware that the quiet woman before them was the first female fighter pilot to fly combat missions in Vietnam, and has more flight hours than most airline pilots will ever see. This story will absolutely blow your mind and show you why you should never judge someone by their appearance. Hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever witnessed discrimination that completely backfired? Stay tuned because what happens next will leave this entire plane speechless. Captain Helen Rodriguez had been looking forward to this flight from Dallas to San Francisco. At 81, she was finally retired from her 40-year career with American Airlines, but they had called her in for one last emergency flight when their scheduled pilot got sick. Helen loved flying more than anything else in the world, and the chance to command one more flight was a gift she couldn't refuse. She had started her pre-flight routine early, arriving at the airport in her crisp pilot uniform with 4 gold stripes on her shoulders. Her silver hair was pulled back neatly under her captain's cap, and despite her age, she moved with the confidence and precision that came from decades in cockpits ranging from military fighters to commercial jets. But as passengers began boarding Flight 447, Helen noticed the whispers and stares that always seemed to follow female pilots, especially older ones. She had dealt with this discrimination for over 50 years, but it still stung every time. The trouble started when Helen made her routine walk through the cabin to personally greet passengers and check on any concerns. It was something she had always done, a personal touch that made nervous flyers feel more comfortable and showed everyone that their pilot was professional and engaged. Marcus Webb, a wealthy businessman in first class, looked up from his phone with obvious disgust when Helen introduced herself as the captain. He let out a loud, sarcastic laugh that caught the attention of surrounding passengers. "Oh, this is just perfect," Marcus announced loudly. "They stick us with some grandma pilot who probably learned to fly in a crop duster. I've got a $10 million deal to close in San Francisco, and my life is in the hands of someone who should be home knitting." Several other passengers began murmuring their agreement. A young man named Tyler, traveling with his college friends, pulled out his phone to record what he clearly thought would be entertaining content. "Dude," Tyler said to his buddies while pointing the camera at Helen, "check this out. Our pilot looks like my great-grandmother. This is going to be the worst flight ever." His friends started laughing and making jokes about needing to update their wills. Helen maintained her professional composure as she continued her cabin check, but the comments kept coming. A middle-aged woman named Karen, traveling with her teenage daughter, stood up from her seat and confronted Helen directly. "Excuse me," Karen said in a voice loud enough for half the plane to hear, "but I paid good money for these tickets, and I expect a qualified pilot. How old are you? Do you even have the reflexes to handle an emergency? My daughter's safety is more important than your feelings." The flight attendants looked uncomfortable, but didn't know how to handle the situation. Other passengers were now openly expressing their concerns about flying with Helen as their pilot. Group of businessmen in seats 5A through 5C started discussing their options. The guy in 5B, named Rick, was particularly vocal about his displeasure. "This is discrimination in reverse," Rick declared. "They probably had to hire her to meet some quota. I bet she's never flown anything bigger than a Cessna. We should demand a different pilot before this plane leaves the ground." His colleagues nodded in agreement, and soon they were trying to flag down flight attendants to register their complaints. The mood in the cabin was becoming increasingly hostile as more passengers joined in questioning Helen's qualifications. A young mother named Ashley, holding her infant son, approached the flight attendant with tears in her eyes. "I can't risk my baby's life with someone who might not be capable of handling this plane," she said loudly. "Please, isn't there another pilot available?" Helen had heard enough. She knew that if she didn't address this situation directly, it would only get worse once they were in the air. She moved to the front of the cabin and picked up the intercom microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Helen said in a calm, professional voice, "I understand some of you have concerns about my qualifications as your pilot today." But before she could continue, Marcus Webb interrupted her with another loud outburst. "Save it, lady. We don't want to hear your prepared speech about diversity and inclusion. We want a real pilot who can actually fly this plane safely." The cabin erupted in a mix of supportive murmurs for Marcus and uncomfortable shifting from passengers who felt the situation was getting out of hand. Tyler was still recording everything on his phone, making sure to capture the drama for his social media followers. That's when a quiet voice from the back of the plane cut through all the noise like a knife. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice said, with unmistakable authority, "you need to sit down and show some respect." Everyone turned to see a distinguished man in his 70s standing in the aisle. He wore a simple polo shirt and khakis, but something about his bearing and the way he commanded attention made the entire cabin fall silent. Admiral James Patterson, retired from the United States Navy, stepped forward with the kind of presence that made people automatically straighten up and pay attention. He had been quietly reading in seat 18F when the confrontation began, but he couldn't stay silent any longer. Admiral Patterson looked directly at Helen and snapped to attention with a crisp salute that every person on that plane could see, and "Here, Captain Rodriguez," the Admiral said in a voice that carried to every corner of the cabin. "It is an honor to fly with you today. My single quotes." The plane went dead silent. Marcus Webb's mouth fell open, and Tyler's phone nearly slipped from his hands as he realized he might be recording something very different from what he had expected. Admiral Patterson turned to face the passengers, his voice filled with the authority of someone who had commanded aircraft carriers and led men in combat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "you are in the presence of a true American hero." Captain Helen Rodriguez was the first woman to fly combat missions in Vietnam. She flew over 200 sorties in hostile territory, was shot down twice, and saved the lives of countless ground troops with her precision bombing runs. The cabin was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning running. Every passenger was staring at Helen with expressions ranging from shock to embarrassment to awe. But Admiral Patterson wasn't finished. He continued in that same commanding voice that had once briefed presidents and generals. After Vietnam, Captain Rodriguez became a test pilot for the Navy, helping to develop the aircraft that would become the backbone of our modern military aviation. She has logged over 30,000 flight hours in everything from fighter jets to commercial airliners. She holds more aviation records than most people could count, and she's forgotten more about flying than most pilots will ever learn. Marcus Webb had gone completely pale. The businessman who had been so vocal about Helen's supposed incompetence now couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Around him, other passengers were beginning to realize the magnitude of their mistake. Admiral Patterson walked up the aisle toward Helen, and every passenger watched as this decorated military officer showed obvious respect and admiration for their pilot. "Captain," the Admiral said to Helen, "I had the privilege of serving with you during Operation Rolling Thunder in 1968. You saved my carrier group when our air support was cut off. I've never forgotten that day, and I've never forgotten your call sign, Hawk." Helen smiled for the first time since boarding the plane. "Admiral Patterson," she said warmly, "I remember you too. It's good to see you again, sir." The transformation in the cabin was immediate and complete. Passengers who had been demanding a different pilot now sat in stunned silence, realizing they had spent the last 30 minutes insulting a genuine war hero and aviation legend. Karen, the woman who had questioned Helen's qualifications so loudly, stood up with tears in her eyes. "Captain Rodriguez," she said in a shaking voice, "I owe you the deepest apology. I had no right to question your abilities, and I'm ashamed of my behavior." One by one, other passengers began to approach Helen with apologies and expressions of gratitude. Marcus Webb, his earlier arrogance completely gone, waited in line to speak with her personally. "Ma'am," Marcus said quietly when his turn came, "I am so sorry for my disrespectful comments. Thank you for your service to our country, and thank you for being our pilot today. I couldn't ask for anyone more qualified." Tyler, the college student, who had been recording for social media, deleted his video and approached Helen with obvious embarrassment. "Captain, I'm really sorry for filming and making jokes. That was completely wrong of me. Would it be okay if I asked for your autograph?" Instead, the flight attendants, who had been struggling to handle the earlier confrontation, now found themselves managing a completely different situation as passengers lined up to meet their pilot and express their admiration. Admiral Patterson spent several minutes talking with Helen about their shared experiences in Vietnam, their mutual friends who had served, and the changes they had seen in military aviation over the decades. Other passengers listened respectfully to their conversation, learning about a part of American history they had never heard before. Ashley, the young mother who had been worried about her baby's safety, approached Helen with her infant son. "Captain Rodriguez," she said softly, "would you mind if I got a picture with you? I want my son to grow up knowing about heroes like you." As the plane prepared for takeoff, the entire atmosphere had changed. Passengers who had been hostile and demanding were now proud to be flying with Captain Helen Rodriguez. Many of them spent the flight asking her questions about her military service and her long career in aviation. During the smooth, perfectly executed flight to San Francisco, Helen shared stories about breaking barriers in a male-dominated field, the challenges she had faced, and the importance of perseverance in the face of discrimination. Her passengers hung on every word, many of them taking notes or recording her stories with her permission. When they landed in San Francisco, with a landing so smooth, it barely felt like the wheels touched the ground, the entire cabin burst into spontaneous applause. It was the kind of landing that comes only from decades of experience and skill that can't be taught in any classroom. As passengers deplaned, each one stopped to thank Helen personally. Many asked for photos, autographs, or contact information so they could learn more about her remarkable story. Admiral Patterson was the last to leave. He shook Helen's hand warmly and said something that summed up the entire experience perfectly. "Hawk," he said with a smile, "some people see an old woman in a pilot's uniform. I see one of the finest aviators who ever lived, regardless of age or gender. It was an honor to fly with you one more time." Helen Rodriguez had faced discrimination and doubt countless times throughout her groundbreaking career, but on Flight 447, she was reminded that respect, once earned through service and sacrifice, has a way of shining through even the darkest prejudice. The passengers who boarded that plane, thinking they knew everything about their pilot, learned that day that heroism often comes in unexpected packages, and that the quiet person sitting next to you might have stories that could change your entire perspective on courage, sacrifice, and what it means to serve your country. Captain Helen Rodriguez completed her final flight that day, but her impact on those passengers would last a lifetime.